Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and in this short video we're going to discuss events that took place during the previous 12 hours. And first we're going to start with Bryansk area. Yesterday in the evening the Ukrainians destroyed and made explosion on the tracks in this area, another explosion, and as a result of that explosion another cargo train was derailed in this area. A few days ago we discussed another case, such a case, but the previous case took place almost on the border with Belarus and Ukraine, very far from the mainland, very far somewhere in this area. And during the previous night, this explosion took place almost inside of the capital of this region in Bryansk. And this is a very big signal for the Russians, because the main target in this case wasn't like to destroy and made explosion on track and derail the train. That wasn't the real target of the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians wanted to send a message to the Russians, and the message is that imagine yourself if today we destroyed not the tracks under the cargo train but under the civilian train. So this is a very bad sign for the Russians one more time, because for now they couldn't find any solution how to prevent this terrorist attack from the Ukrainian side. And I believe that these days the Ukrainians are going to increase the intensity of the explosions on the tracks if they can. And furthermore, I believe that Bryansk area is going to be not the only region where the Ukrainians are going to make explosions on the tracks and to derail the trains. As a result of, as an answer to this situation, the Russians continue bombing with the guided bombs the north of Ukraine, the Kiev, the Chernigov and Sumy region, trying to spot and destroy the Ukrainian positions in this area. And the Russians published another photo of the destroyed building, of the destroyed plant, as a result of attack of guided bomb in this area. That was like the response to the previous derailing event that Ukrainians made on the territory of Bryansk area. During the previous night there were another drone attack all over the entire Ukraine. The Russians were attacking the towns like Kiev, Kharkov, Dnipro, Zaporozhye, and there was explosions in the vicinity of Uman, in Kirovogradskaya and Cherkasskaya regions. The Ukrainians are saying that as a result of air defense work they managed to shut down 21 of 26 drones. That was drones attack. They would know the Russians didn't use missiles, and we understand that this is the first wave of Russian attack, and the main purpose of that attack is to discover and to stress the Ukrainian air defense system. I believe that currently the Russians have enough of information, and I expect that within the next 24 hours either the Russians are going to send another drone wave, or they will launch missiles and to try to destroy the Ukrainian positions, Ukrainian fuel depots and so on. When talking about Kiev, there were a lot of explosions, but the Ukrainians are saying that most of them were as a result of air defense work. There was real explosions in Zaporozhye, and there was real explosions in Kharkiv. That it was 100% confirmed that was explosions as a result of attack of drone. Very interesting information are coming from Crimea, from Black Sea area. If we take a look at the Russian sources map, if you remember, a few days ago the Ukrainians made another drone attack on Crimea, and they were targeting the fuel depots in this area, and as a result of that attack another fuel depot was destroyed. Currently the Western sources published the photos of the results of that attack, and that fuel depot was not completely destroyed but was damaged, and I believe that the Russians had a lot of losses among fuel and so on. And during the previous night, the Ukrainians made another attack, and they were attacking another fuel depot that located on the island between the Crimea and the main Russian land. So this fuel depot was destroyed. Today the Russians published this photo and video confirmation. To tell the truth, this fuel depot was damaged less than that one in Crimea, but anyway, this is a very bad sign for the Russians as well. As you can see, recently the Ukrainians were trying to attack this area using missiles, and they were tracking the bridge. Now we understand that maybe the Ukrainians using the rocket Grom 2 was trying to destroy this fuel depot, and all those missiles and drones were shut down by the Russians air defense system. But the previous night the Ukrainians could get this fuel depot, and that means that those missiles managed to bypass the Russian air defense system, and this is a very bad sign for the Russians. of course. And as we can see, the Ukrainians continue suppressing and reducing the possibilities of Russian naval fleet, because they understand that currently this is this fleet has the biggest danger for the Ukrainians on the south of Ukraine, and they understand that before the launching of the greatest counter-offensive operation, the Ukrainians need to do as much as possible but to reduce the capabilities of this fleet. And for now, we see that they have already destroyed or damaged at least 2 fuel depots. I believe that they will continue attacking these fuel depots, trying to reduce the number of fuel in these depots as low as possible. I think that there are more fuel depots along the coast that the Russians are using for supporting and supplying their fleet, and I expect that the Ukrainians will continue attacking them, and we'll see what is going to be next. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye. Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 2nd of May of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And as usually, the most important and interesting updates are coming from Bakhmut these days. As you can see, the Russian sources deployment map has been updated. Currently, we can find progress in the northwest of part of Bakhmut, and the Russian sources are saying, and the Ukrainian source confirms, that this is the area of the most heaviest and fierce clashes in this town. And as you can see, according to this map, that the most of Ukrainian brigades are moved in this area, in this direction, to stay as close as possible to the evacuation roads. For example, today there was a piece of information according to the Wagners that during the day some very high officers, so Ukrainian officers, visited the western part of Bakhmut, and during that process one of the armored vehicle was destroyed by the Russian artillery, and the Wagners reported that they managed to kill the general of the territory defense brigade in this area. Later, the Ukrainian officials reported that nobody was killed during that attack, so this is like the thing that happens in Bakhmut. If we take a look at the Western sources map, and according to the report, we understand that currently the Russians are trying to develop their offensive operation in direction of the hospital along Piramogi Street. Currently, there are very heavy clashes and fierce clashes in the vicinity of the Olympic School in this area. This is the last Ukrainian checkpoint fortress in this area in the northwest of Bakhmut. And if the Russians are able to take this area under control, then it will just take maybe even hours until the Russians reach the river and the Khromova from the south. Also, the Russians are trying to develop their offensive operation between the western fortification and Piramogi Street as well. Very small local attacks. But as you can see, according to the maps, every single map, the Russians are not entering this western fortification. And this is not about the fact that there are a lot of Ukrainians, but there are a lot of Ukrainians, of course. And the main reason is that almost every single building, possibly that almost every single building in this area is mined by the Ukrainians. And the Russians understand that it's just a useless waste of time to attack this area. For them, it's much more easier to attack this area from the north and to cut the final supply road, the final supply endpoint that located in this area. And if the Russians are able to block or take control, then we see that even if there are some forces, they will be completely encircled and blocked in this western part of Bakhmut, and it will take just days or maybe weeks until the area falls and the Ukrainians are going to surrender. But anyway, if the Russians are able to do this, we can say that entire Bakhmut is taken by the Russians. And of course, as we understand, the Russians will try to achieve this goal by the 9th of May, and from the other side, the Ukrainians will do the same. They will try to keep and hold this area as long as possible, and from the things that we see, that Ukrainians are almost encircled and that they don't have, or their possibilities to evacuate from this area is too low. I believe that they will stay here until the 9th of May, because simply say that basically they don't have possibilities to evacuate. As you can see, some Russian sources are saying that the Russians managed to cross Tchaikovsky Street from the south, moving in this direction, so we can say that possibly this part of the hat of cauldron has already been created, and there's not much left until the entire cauldron of the Bakhmut, of the rest of Bakhmut. The Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost, when talking about the entire Donetsk front line, not just about Bakhmut, the Ukrainians lost 300 soldiers, 11 armored vehicles, including one tank and one artillery system D-20. Other important updates are coming from Avdiivka, from this front line. At least several Ukrainian sources this evening of the local time start publishing information updates that Ukrainians launched their own counter-offensive operation in this area, and as a result of those offensive operations, they managed to penetrate the Russians' defense orders in the vicinity of Avdiivka for up to 1.5 kilometers. Later, also this day, the Russian sources, who has connections with the forces on the ground, collected all the possible information and reported that that was some kind of fake from the Ukrainian side. For now, I believe it's very difficult to understand or determine who is lying and who is telling truth. I believe we need to wait for another day. And if the Ukrainians did have some progress today, I believe that in a day or in 2 weeks we would see the real progress on the map and everybody will confirm this information. When talking about this area, the Russians reported that as a result of artillery clashes, bombings and duels, they at one for another time in a row, they attacked the positions of 24th Mechanized Brigade, but this brigade is located in Konstantinovka. This is the not very lucky brigade, 24th. If you remember, a few days ago, the Russians reported as a result of missile attack of the headquarters of that brigade, 24th Brigade in Konstantinovka, up to 200 soldiers were killed and up to 280 soldiers were wounded, so up to 1 battalion. So today the Russians continue attacking this area. Furthermore, the Russians reported that as a result of attack they managed to destroy some railroads, some trains on the railroadways in Konstantinovka with the ammo on board. The Russians haven't provided the info about the real number of losses and so on, and tons of ammo, but anyway, when talking about the defense operation of Bakhmut, every single warehouse is very important these days. Very interesting updates are coming from Kherson area, from this region. As you can see, there are a lot of icons, and we see that there is some kind of intensifying of activities from the Ukrainian side, and more facts and numbers are saying that this is exactly the area where the Ukrainians are going to launch their counter-offensive operation. At least I'm not sure about the bank of the river between Golaya Pristin, let's say, and Novokakhovka. I'm not sure about any possible operation from the Ukrainian side in this area. But when talking about Kinburn Strait, about this part of Kherson region, I give you like 90% that Ukrainians are going to cross this Dnipro River and this bay and to establish control over this Kinburn Strait. If we take a look at the one more time, if we take a look at the Russian sources map, today the Russians reported that as a result of artillery duels and some kind of clashes, they managed to shut down 2 aircrafts, one more time, one MiG-29 on the north. I believe that there are no connections of this MiG-29 with the situation on the south, and furthermore they confirmed another destroyed Su-25 in the vicinity of Velitenska. If we will increase the range of updates that we can see on this area, let's say for months, we're gonna see that there are very heavy clashes on the islands exactly in this area, and we see that Ukrainians are trying to capture every single small local port in this area, the ex-residential area. There are a lot of them. Using the boats, they can establish control, they can establish some radars and so on, and they're pushing and trying to develop their bridgehead to the south in direction of this Kinburn Strait. From the other side, furthermore, as you can see, the Ukrainians also uses a lot of air forces in this area, so we see that this area is very important for the Ukrainians. From the Russian side, the Russians are bombing this bank of Dnipro River. They're destroyed using the guided bombs. Also, the Russians attacking using the guided bombs the Ukrainian positions on these islands. And there is a very fierce clashings, and the facts are saying that possibly the Ukrainians will try to do this, because no matter the results of the counter-offensive Ukrainian operation, we understand that, for example, some official Ukrainian authorities also reported and confirmed my words that Possibly they're going to be not just one counter-offensive operation from the Ukrainian side, possibly they're going to be the second and the third, and depending on this upcoming counter-offensive operation, the Western countries would determine which kind of support they will provide to the Ukrainians. So that's why they need to show the results, and possibly if the Ukrainians are going to be successful during the upcoming counter-offensive operation, they will get Abrams and F-16 Air Force airplanes this year. So no matter the results, no matter the loss from the Ukrainian side, they need to take control. The Ukrainians need to take control over this Kinburn Strait, because as we discussed in the past, it will allow them to unblock Nikolaev port. And of course, one port is good, but to have two ports is the best thing. Furthermore, we know that the Russians have already blocked the grain deal. I don't have any updates, more fresh news, piece of news about the situation, but I believe that the battle for the Black Sea with the naval forces of Russian Federation will be a part of this counter-offensive operation, of course, and the Ukrainians will try to destroy the Russian fleet, and with one purpose, to unblock the grain deal, or at least to make this situation like very uncomfortable for the Russians, and not to allow the Russians to block this area anymore. And if they have, after all, two ports, of course, they will have more weapon, more supply from the Western countries, and it can increase the Ukrainian pressure on towards the Russian positions. So no matter the results and no matter the situation, how the things is going to develop in Zaporozhye area, the Ukrainians will try to cross the river, this bay, and they will try to establish control over this Kinburn Strait. As you can see, this is a very perfect position for the Ukrainians, because from on the bank in the Chakov, or all of this area, they will have a lot of artillery positions that would be completely untouchable from the Russian side, at least the positions in the Chakova. And if the Russians want to destroy the Ukrainian artillery position in Chakov, there are not much way they can do this. First of all, using drones, of course, or maybe missiles, but the Russians, for example, won't be able to attack the Ukrainian positions in Achakov using their own artillery, because the position is not very good for the Russian side. Anyway, the Ukrainians will try, at least during the first phase, to establish control over the strait just with light infantry. They don't have possibilities to move their tanks or something like this, but it will be like the second, the third stage of the counter-offensive operation. They will try to get some kind of vehicles, some kind of construction vehicles, and to prepare as much as possible trenches in this area. The Ukrainians do have a lot of boats, a lot of way how to supply this area, and no matter the losses during the next stage of this special military operation this year, they will try to hold this area as long as possible. If you ask me, I'll give you my own opinion. For example, the question is why the Ukrainians won't try to attack the Russians along this Dnipro River, and the answer is very simple: is because this bank of the river is a small but very long town. There are a lot of buildings, a lot of residential area. There is a lot of places where the Russians can hide. Furthermore, there is a mainland right behind this area where the Russians can establish their artillery system, and using this artillery system, they can suppress the Ukrainian positions, and without any danger or any risk being hit by the Ukrainian side. Furthermore, the Russians uses a lot of missiles, rockets. They uses artillery system, air forces, and so on. But when talking about the Kinburn Strait, we see that, for example, if the Russians want to get their artillery, they can deploy their artillery somewhere in 15-20 kilometers. So as you can see, if the Russians will get their artillery to this line, it's like 40 kilometers to these positions. So it's not very good. It will be very difficult for the Russians to protect this area. The only possible way what the Russians are able to do is to use fleet to defend this area, but it's so risky to use Russian fleet and to send Russian fleet toward this Kinburn Strait. It's too risky, and the Russians can really lost every single ship in their fleet if they take a decision to protect this area using fleet. I don't think, I'm not sure what the Russians are going to do, but I think that it's too risky. And if you ask me, I'm not saying that I'm for the Ukrainians or for the Russians. I'm just saying you that there is a very high chances, as I understand, that the Ukrainians are able to establish control over this part of the Kinburn Strait, and they will keep and hold this area as long as possible, because for them it's a vital question. And when talking about the Russians, currently they maybe during some period of time, as a result of their own counter-offensive operation against the Ukrainian counter-offensive operation, they will be able to return control over this strait, but it will take time, and possibly maybe without establishing control over Achakov and Nikolaev, there would be very low chances if the Russians are able to return control back over the Kinburn Strait. It's the most dangerous part, and the Ukrainians understand this, and of course they will increase their pressure, and we will see this operation also very soon. Furthermore, Blinken reported today, for example, that the next week the Ukrainians are going to launch their counter-offensive operation the next week, so it was like some kind of like a promise. And we understand that the 9th of May is the next week. It's Tuesday of the next week, so I believe that possibly on the 9th of May the Ukrainians are going to launch some provocation, some action, and right exactly at this date or the day before they will launch their counter-offensive operation, and this is going to be something terrible, with many losses, and possibly with many losses from both sides. Furthermore, the Russian sources are saying that Ukrainians have already completed the creation of the first wave of the counter-offensive operation. You know that the Ukrainians have a lot of types of weapon, their own forces, the forces that were trained in the Western countries, and many other things. So, as I understand, as the first wave of counter-offensive operation, the Ukrainians are going to use their own forces, and there's going to be a 128th Storm Brigade, 46th, 71st Brigade. These brigades are already deployed in this area. For example, the 71st Brigade is deployed in the vicinity of Nikopol, and possibly the Ukrainians will make another attempt to cross Dnipro River and to establish control over the Zaporozhye power plant, and it's like a very tasty piece of cake, and I believe the Ukrainians will try to do this. For example, when talking about Orehov Gulay Polya, the Ukrainians have already redeployed their 46th Mechanized Brigade, 128th, 116th. There were updates, so I believe that this brigade will be used as the first wave, as the brigades that main purpose is to penetrate and to ruin the first line of Russian defense. And after that, only after that, maybe the Ukrainians will use their newly created brigade, Western countries brigade, that will just pass by the destroyed and meet fields of dead bodies of the Ukrainians and the Russians in direction of Tokmak. Furthermore, the Russian sources are saying that during the previous 24 hours there was another terrorist attack in Melitopol. The Ukrainians mined the area and they wanted to kill some kind of police officer who supported the Russian forces. The Russians are saying that this person was wounded but not killed. Now let's talk a little bit about South Donetsk area. As you can see, there are also icons, but there are not much changes on the ground. There are not changes at all on the ground. The Russians are saying that as a result of clashes on South Donetsk, Zaporozhye and Kherson area, the Ukrainians lost 80 soldiers, 9 armored vehicles and 1 artillery system. As you can see, not much losses. And the same situation we can say there is the same situation as there was yesterday, before yesterday on the Kupiansk and Liman front line. The Russians are saying that as a result of clashes, the Ukrainians lost 125 soldiers, 9 armored vehicles and 3 artillery systems. The Russians attacked using the artillery and missiles the same brigades, 14th, 92nd Mechanized Brigade on the Kupiansk front line. Also, the Ukrainians lost another ammo depot of 14th Mechanized Brigade. And when talking about Liman, the same brigades, 81st, 58th in the vicinity of Serebryanka Forest were attacked by the Russians. Also, 1 ammo depot of 81st Air Missile Brigade was destroyed in Grigorovka, but as you can see also there are no changes on the ground. Today the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation gave another report about the situation on the front lines during the past months, during the April, and he reported that as a result of clashes, as a result of special military operation, the Ukrainians lost more than 15,000 soldiers just for the April, so the losses are very heavy. It's around 3 fully blooded brigades. The numbers are very bad for the Ukrainians, and furthermore the Russians are saying that they managed to increase the production of modern weapon in 2.5 times. Now they, according to the Russian sources, they don't have problems with production of any type of weapon, neither drones or shells or something like this. I believe that currently the Russians are working on the establishing of logistic, and something tells me that somewhere by the end of May, or maybe right in the middle or during the Ukraine counteroffensive operation, the Russians will launch their own, maybe not like counteroffensive operation, but the massive attack using everything they have that could lead to significant losses from the Ukrainian side. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye. Hello my dear friends. You're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 3rd of May of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And the most important and the most interesting update is coming from Moscow, from the heart of Russian Empire, from the heart of Russian Federation, from the heart of Russian world. And currently, the heart of Russian world was attacked by a drone. If you know, yesterday in the evening, somebody attacked Kremlin by drone. And as a result of that attack, nobody died, but anyway, that was another episode of humiliation. Most of the Russian military experts, most of the Russian sources are saying that that was attack of Ukrainian forces, to be more precise, of Ukrainian special forces. But the Ukrainians are saying that they have no connection to this event, to this situation. Furthermore, some Ukrainian official authorities are saying that that attack was prepared and was made by the Russian rich people, Russian oligarchs, who are under sanctions, and that was like their reply to the situation in Russia and to the situation that Russia is isolated and the situation that all their money are arrested in the Western countries. There are a lot of questions, there are more answers than the questions to this situation, and the most important that concerns me is that this situation took place yesterday in the evening, and just after, let's say, 12 or from 12 to till 16 hours, the Russian authorities provided any information about that case. This is a very big gap between the event that took place and the period of time when the information was published in the open source. And the thing is, some Ukrainian sources, the Ukrainian intelligence and the Ukrainian sources who are very connected to the tightly connected with the Ukrainian intelligence, are saying that the Russians took such a big pause because they were trying to understand what can they do next. They didn't expect that attack, and they were just trying to analyze, understand whether the Ukrainians has any connection to the situation, whether the Ukrainians are responsible for that, and the Ukrainian sources are saying that the Russians found the necessary evidence of that, and they were analyzing and thinking what kind of decision the Russians can take about this situation. And the Ukrainian sources, the Western sources, are saying that the Russians took a very tough and very difficult decision about the Ukrainians. I believe that soon we're going to see the real response from the Russian side. But for example, the Ukrainian sources are saying that they have no connection to this situation. That this attack by the drones was prepared by the Russians rich people, Russian oligarchs, who are currently under Western sanctions, and that was like their response to the situation with Russia, to the situation with isolation of Russia, and that all their money are arrested on the Western bank accounts. Furthermore, very interesting update are coming about Zelensky and the president of Ukraine. If you know, today, before the Russian sources published any information about the attack against Kremlin, this morning we got piece of news that Zelensky was planning to visit Finland for some purposes and so on, and he visited Finland, and currently he is located in this country. And the Russians, after the Russians published this piece of news about the attack against Kremlin, the office of President of Zelensky reported that Zelensky changed his plans, and currently he was planning to stay in Finland for a day, but after that update he took a decision to stay more in Finland. So we see that this might be some kind of reaction and some kind of response to this situation. So as I understand, if
if that attack was made by the Ukrainian special forces, that means that Ukrainians and the Western countries took a decision to hide Zelensky in the territory of the NATO country during the upcoming events, because we know that all these attacks against Kremlin, those events with derailing of the trains in Bryansk area, those attacks against the fuel depots in Sevastopol and in Crimea, another fuel depot on the Russian mainland, all these events, the Russian missile attack against the Pavlograd, all these events took place right before the topic, right before the rumors about and talks about the upcoming counteroffensive operation. And currently, now let's go to this possible counteroffensive operation and let's talk about the situation on the ground. For example, for these purposes, let's take the Western sources map. For example, the Russian sources are saying that Ukrainians managed to accumulate up to 4,000 soldiers, even more, along the border with Moldova. And the Russians are saying that starting from the 9th of May till the 15th of May, the Ukrainians are going to start some kind of provocation against Pridnestrovia. And the real reason, and according to the real plan, as we discussed many times from the Ukrainian side, is to establish control over the small settlement that located in Pridnestrovia by the name of Kolbasnaya. This is the ex-Soviet base, and there are biggest warehouse ammo depot on this area. So possibly from the 9th of May till the 15th of May, we are going to see some provocation and some kind of operation of the Ukrainian forces in this area. And now the important updates are coming from Kherson. The Ukrainians continue the redeployment process of their forces in direction of Kherson with maybe possible attempt to cross Dnipro River. The Russians discovered all this situation and they managed to attack this area, while the Ukrainians were doing some kind of stuff on the railroad station. As a result of that attack, the Russians are saying that they managed to destroy, and the Ukrainian losses are around 160 soldiers on the railroad station of Kherson and up to few armored vehicles in this area. Very interesting updates are coming today from Zaporozhye area. The Ukrainian sources, the Russian sources are saying that yesterday in the evening the Ukrainians started their recon combat, and very slowly, step by step, this recon combat turned into the real offensive operation from Orekhov to the south in direction of Tokmak. The Ukrainians were using armored vehicles, tanks, the Western tanks, the like some kind of armored vehicles, machines like Bradley and Strikers. They were attacking all over the front line. The Russians are still hold this area, and they didn't step back in this area. They're saying that Ukrainians had losses, but they're not retreating. They're just changing waves by waves, and they're continue pushing in direction of Tokmak. So we can say that maybe that operation was recon combat yesterday, but if when talking about today, this is a little bit more than just a recon combat, but this is still not a real counter-offensive operation in this area. The Russians are saying that as a result of clashes on Zaporozhye, Kherson and South Donetsk area, the Ukrainians lost just around 60 soldiers, 5 armored vehicles, 130 soldiers, 11 armored vehicles and 4 artillery systems. Now we're moving to Donetsk. Very interesting updates are coming from this during the day, at least in the morning, before the Russian sources published about attempt of Ukrainians to attack Kremlin. The Ukrainians, according to the Ukrainian sources, launched a small counter-offensive operation exactly along these arrows. So they were attacking not in direction of Gorlovka, they were attacking not in direction of Novobakhmutovka or Krasnogorovka. The Ukrainians were attacking between the bridgeheads in Gorlovka and, let's say, Avdiivka, right between the Russian positions. Currently, if we take a look, if we talk about this area, these fields used to be in a gray zone. So we can't say that this is a real counter-offensive operation, but as a result of Ukrainian attempts, they managed to reduce and to short the gray zone. And of course, they managed to stress the Russians. And currently, the Russians need to find a solution how to stop the Ukrainians in this area and not to allow them to develop their offensive operation further to the south. Very interesting updates are coming from Bakhmut and Artyomovsk or Bakhmut. For example, as you can see, there are no changes on the ground. The Russians are pushing all over the front line, trying to establish control over the northern part between Chromova and Western fortification. And today we got very interesting piece of news that as a result of clashes, fierce fightings, the 97th Battalion of 60th Mechanized Brigade took a decision not to follow the Ukrainian orders and they left their positions. And as we know, this is a practice, this is experience, and this is not the first time when we see such a case since the beginning of the special military operation. And every single time when this or that battalion or group of Ukrainian forces take a decision to step back, the entire front line in this area collapses. For example, the same case we saw in Solidar when some forces in Yakovlevka, Ukrainian forces, took a decision to step back. As I remember, that was 118th Territorial Defense Brigade. The same situation we saw in Lysychansk when under very heavy fire the Ukrainians took a decision to step back and then the entire front line collapsed. And the same situation currently we can see in Bakhmut. If we take a look at the Russian deployment map, we're going to see that this 60th Mechanized Brigade is located in the Western fortification. I'm not saying that they're located exactly there, but if you remember, during the previous weeks we got a lot of updates about this 60th Mechanized Brigade, and at least this 60th Mechanized Brigade or some parts of that brigade, when talking about Bakhmut, were responsible for this interception of Tchaikovskого Street and Yubileyная Street. As we know that according to the Russian sources, they managed to establish control over this area, and the Russians could establish this control over this area right after they attacked the reserves and the positions of this 60th Mechanized Brigade. As I understand, this brigade had a lot of losses, and currently they left their positions, so we expect that within the next 24 hours, the Russians will be able to develop their offensive operation deeper inside the Western fortification. And of course, this is going to be collapse and be a very big problem for the Ukrainian forces. The Russians are saying that as a result of clashes, fierce clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost 385 soldiers, 11 armored vehicles, including 3 tanks and 4 artillery systems. Very interesting updates are coming a little bit from the north, from Belogorovka, from this area. You need to understand that weather are getting better and better every day. And for example, today the Ukrainian sources are saying, who are tightly connected to the Ukrainian intelligence, that Syrsky, the head of defense of this entire Bakhmut operation, reported to Zelensky that the weather is good and that the Ukrainians are able to launch and start their counter-offensive operation. And according to these sources that are tightly connected with the Ukrainian intelligence, the Ukrainians are going to attack from Siversk in direction of Popasna, as we discussed, and another attack is going to be somewhere in this area where we currently receive updates about some progress from New York Toretsk agglomeration in direction of Gorlovka, between Gorlovka and Makeyevka. So somewhere in this area are going to be another attack from the Ukrainian side. And today we received another very interesting piece of information about Belogorovka. As I told you in the previous videos, that currently this is the most heaviest, one of the most heaviest part of the Ukrainian special military operation, maybe the second place after Bakhmut, fierce fightings and so on. During the previous weeks, there were a lot of videos about this area. We talk a lot about the Ukrainian positions who are located in this area: 81st Brigade, 54th Brigade, 58th Brigade, and so on. And these brigades are holding the hills in the vicinity of Belogorovka. And the most important, powerful fortification that was under Ukrainian control is this industrial zone that located on the southeast of Belogorovka itself. The Russians, as a result of previous weeks, managed to develop their bridgehead along these brushes forest lines. Later this week we got updates how the Russians were attacking this industrial zone using the flamethrower systems TOS-1. As I understand, they managed to destroy every single manpower inside of this fortification, and later the Russians entered this area. And today the Ukrainian sources are saying, and some very reliable Russian sources are saying, that the Russians managed to enter this industrial zone, but the Ukrainians later established fire artillery control over entire area, and currently the Russians are saying that 100 Russian soldiers who are currently located in this industrial zone are encircled. This is not like real physical encirclement like from both sides, like physical cut of the roads. The Ukrainians just managed to establish artillery control over every single road that the Russians are able to could use for supplying this area. I'm not saying that this is a critical situation, just like small operational crisis that the Russians need to solve within a few days or within the next 24 hours, because these guys, they need to defend, they need to protect themselves, they need to use ammo, and I believe that soon they will be out of ammo, and after that the Ukrainians would be able to establish control and capture these soldiers without any problem. So now the Russians need to solve this operational crisis, and I believe that currently they are completely focused in this area. But anyway, this is another very interesting update from this front line during the previous 24 hours. When talking about the Kupiansk and Liman front line, there are no changes on the ground, just the regular updates as we saw yesterday, the day before yesterday. The Russians are saying that as a result of fierce clashings, artillery duels, bombings, and so on, the Ukrainians lost 90 soldiers, 9 armored vehicles, and 3 artillery systems. So this is about the situation on the ground. Just one more time, I'll remind you the events that took place in Crimea. For example, the Russians are saying that during the previous night the Ukrainians made another drone attack against the fuel depot on the mainland of Russian Federation. There was an explosion, and currently I believe that, of course, this situation reduced the Russian naval possibilities. Furthermore, don't forget that a few days ago the Ukrainians destroyed another fuel depot in the south of Crimea, and right before I started making this video, the Russian source reported that there was a work of air defense system in the south of Crimea, and the Russians managed to shut down the Ukrainians' drones in this area. And don't forget about 2 cases of derailing of Russian trains from the tracks in the Bryansk area. So situation is very difficult, situation is very complicated, and we are going to see more and more intensifying of actions in the special military operation. But and that's it about the situation. Now let's talk one more time, few words about this attack against Kremlin. You know that there is one important diplomacy doctrine that lots of countries are trying to follow, and this is doctrine of diplomatic synchronously attacks and synchronously actions. So what does it mean? For example, if you take a decision to reduce the number of embassy of this or that country, that means that this country is going to make the same synchronous action. They will reduce the number of your embassy, the same amount of people, the same amount of workers. So if the Ukrainians and if the Russians have the evidence that that attack was made by the Ukrainians, so according to this diplomatic doctrine of a synchronous answer, the Russians have right to do the same action against the Ukrainian authorities. And the question is whether the Russians are going to try to attack Zelensky or not. If you ask me, I'll give you my opinion. The Russians have this right, and of course they will use this right, but when they think it's better to use this. The only doubts I have that the Russians are going to strike using daggers or any type of weapon Zelensky. I don't think so, because like to show the Russians possibilities, it's not the thing that they need to do, because nobody harmed Putin and Putin is safe and there is no problem with him. So to attack the president of office using the drones is not like a solution. It's not like the same thing. But you know that all these operations on the territory of Russian Federation were prepared by the head of Ukrainian intelligence, Budanov. Budanov is the head of Ukrainian intelligence, and he is responsible, and he was responsible for the killing of Russian blogger Vladlen Tatarsky in St. Petersburg a month ago when he was just bombed and by the statue. This person, Budanov, was responsible for the killing of Dugina. The special forces, Ukrainian forces, killed that woman by mining her car and blowing up her car. This man was responsible for crossing the border between Russia and Ukraine when the Ukrainian soldiers entered this territory and captured like prisoners in these villages. That event took place 2 months ago or something like this. This person was responsible for derailing of the trains. This person was responsible for every single attack above the territory of Russian Federation using the drones. This person was responsible for attacking the airport in Belarus, Machulishi one, like a very important, very useful aircraft was attacked by the drones. And this person is responsible for almost every single terrorist on the territory of Russian Federation when this or that authorities was killed by bombs or something like this. So I believe, if you ask me, for the Russians, if they have a right to attack one official person of Ukrainian authorities, I believe that they will choose the head of Ukrainian Special Forces, Budanov, because he did a lot of mistakes, he did a lot of problems for the Russians, and as I understand, and as I see, and most of the people understand, that this man lost his understanding of the situation, and he lost the feeling of the world around him, because he crossed a lot of too many red lines in this special military operation, and I believe that he is going to be the next target of the Russians. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.